Mr. President, I rise in opposition to the so-called bipartisan deal, and I have very strong reasons for opposing it and supporting the alternative, which is the Reid-Warren alternative. Now, Senator from Tennessee said he likes the sound of bipartisan deal. So do I. I mean, let me tell you, it feels good to get things done around here in a bipartisan way. But that doesn't mean because it's called bipartisan, it's the right thing to do. Sometimes Democrats will have the right idea, sometimes Republicans will have the right idea, and we debate it. I think it was interesting to hear Senator Alexander's comments. It was a very interesting speech because it was part of an, saying it's wonderful, we're going to help students on one hand. On the other hand, he talks about changing the way we do our accounting to crack down on students. And then he says, in his state, a student can get $5,500 loan, even though it only costs $3,500. What about the books you have to buy? What about the transportation? What about all the other out-of-pocket expenses? So I listened to my friend from Tennessee, and I know he is a leader on education, but I think he had kind of a dual message. On the one hand, it's wonderful to help our students. On the other, well, maybe it's just too much of a risk. I have to tell you, according to the information I have from my experts, it's pretty tough when you take out a student loan. The federal government, if you don't pay it back, can garnish your wages, can do lots of things. So I am opposed to this bipartisan deal and in strong support of the Reid-Warren measure. Now, I have up to 30 minutes, and I wanted to ask if Senator wanted to make a unanimous
I wonder if the Senator would just yield for unanimous consent.
Yes, I will.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Gabe Sandler, Madeline Walker, Katie Caston, and Megan Miraglia of my staff be granted 4 privileges for the duration of today's session. And I ask consent that these remarks appear at the end of the Senator's speech so that her speech appears uninterrupted in the record.
Without objection.
I thank my colleague. And I'm glad that a lot of people are listening to this debate because it's very important. I'm going to read some of the criticisms of this bipartisan deal that come from outside groups. The first is the National Association of Graduate and Professional Students. This is what they said. This bill falls short in preventing higher student loan interest rates, especially for graduate and professional students. A cap of 9.5% for graduate and professional students offers no guarantees that our rates won't increase. We should be encouraging students to enter higher education, to keep our economy growing, not deterring them with higher rates. The Young Invincibles also oppose this bill, writing that, quote, even as the federal government makes $184 billion off the federal loan program, students and families will be forced to pay more under this bill than under current law. If you just let the current law exist, at the end of the day, because of the difference in the caps, students would be better off in the out years and into the future. And for anyone who says this is temporary, make no mistake about it. Republicans have said this is permanent. This is permanent. We may revisit other things, and I hope we do, because there's a lot we should look at. The ability of students to refinance their loans, lots of other things I hope we can work on. But this particular deal, if you look at the Republicans' own words, it's a permanent deal. U.S. Public Interest Group says this so-called deal, they oppose it because it's worse than current student loan policy. Current law includes an unjustifiable 10-year revenue stream of $184 billion flowing directly from student borrowers to the federal government. This bill does not address that problem. Instead, it exacerbates it, generating an additional $715 million in new revenue off the backs of student loan borrowers to pay down the deficit. And they close their comments by saying, enough is enough. Now, people listening to this debate, I'm sure, could be a bit confused about exactly what we're talking about. So I'm going to try to take you through some of the facts surrounding this debate. But I think it's important that we understand what students are feeling out there, Mr. President, what students are feeling out there. So I'm going to read a few. In California, Amy and Christian Didi owe over $82,000 in student loans. Amy, who has a master's degree in psychology, and Christian, a cardiovascular nurse, says, "It's like carrying a big backpack filled with bricks all over the place, and I can't ever let it go. It's always there. I could get rid of a few bricks, but there's always going to be more. I don't see the student loans going away." And I've met people who are still paying off their student loans, and they're on Social Security. Tammy Brown of Reading, she said, the government has been taking $179, here it is, out of her Social Security disability check each month for the past 5 years. Brown, 52, became disabled in 1986 after being involved in a car accident. Unable to work, she fell behind on her student loan payments. She said the Social Security check is too small to cover her food and medical bills, so she quit taking prescription pain pills. It's kind of hard to live on this amount of money, she said. There's a woman on Social Security disability. And what are we doing in the bipartisan deal? We're laying on top of what we already make from student loans an additional $715 million. Joseph Luca of Portland, Maine, started college as a pre-med student, but he switched to mechanical engineering because the thought of graduating with more than $100,000 in student loans after medical school was too daunting. And I will get back to some of these comments at the close of my time. I mean, you have to ask a few questions. Why are we piling on another $715 million of debt on the backs of our students? So we could stand up here and say we did a bipartisan deal, and I know how hard it was. And yes, there are great improvements from where it started. I appreciate that. But we have a better deal. It's called Reed-Warren. It matches those low rates that you see in the bipartisan deal for the first 3 years. It matches it, but then it takes the rates down. And I'm going to show you just how much money we save students from the Reed-Warren legislation, because it takes the rates down. Did students put 2 wars on a credit card, Mr. President? Is that why they got to be punished here? Were students running the banks that placed huge bets on Wall Street leading up to the crash? Did students create a drug benefit in the Medicare program without paying for it? Did students create and sell toxic mortgages, swaps, and securities? Oh, no, they didn't do any of that. But apparently, we're forcing students to pay for them by tacking another $715 million on the backs of students. And I have to say, when it comes to the banks, oh, hundreds of billions of dollars, no problem. Too big to fail. It's very hard to explain to people, to students. Oh, we say we love our children and we want them to succeed, and yes, we do, but we don't follow our words with actions, because if we followed our words with actions, we would have embraced the Reed-Warren solution. But the handwriting's clearly on the wall, and we're not going to have the votes to do that. So we're going to ask our students to continue to pay more and more and more. You know, we ought to look at what past presidents have said about the importance of education. I just feel I must point out, Americans have always said that our values include valuing our students. So let's go back. George H.W. Bush. Think about every problem, every challenge. The solution to each starts with education. How right he was when he said that. Bill Clinton, when we make college more affordable, we make the American dream more achievable. How right he was to say that. George W. Bush, our country must focus our education system on helping workers learn the new skills of the 21st century so we can increase the job base of this country. And Barack Obama, the jobs of the future are increasingly going to be those with more than a high school degree. We want Americans getting those jobs of the future. We're going to have to make sure they're getting the education they need. Okay, so how about charging our students $715 million more? That really helps us do what these presidents have called us to do, which is to value our children, to value education. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. A clear message. And believe me, it's hard to find on a lot of issues. Education is key. Our students are important. They need the education to get the jobs. Well, I'm going to show you exactly what this bipartisan bill is going to cost. I already told you it's $715 million over the course of time to the government. Let's look at what each family will have to pay more under this so-called deal compared with the Reid-Warren substitute. First, let's take a look at the 10-year loan. Now, what we do on all these charts is we go out to the cap, because we know the caps will all be reached. All you have to do is look at the experts. They've told us the caps will be reached. You take the 30-year average rate of the 10-year note, you add on the surcharge, and bingo, the caps will be reached in a few years. So let's look at it. The Reid Amendment versus the deal. If you have a $15,000 loan for 10 years under the deal, you pay $1,363 more than you would have under the Reid Amendment. If you have a $25,000 loan over 10 years, you pay $2,271 more under the bipartisan deal. If you have a $50,000 loan, and you can get those, by the way, for 10 years, you pay $4,500 more. So now let's see if you decided you wanted to take 20 years to pay back that undergraduate loan. I'm sorry, 25 years. So you decide you want to take 25 years. You will pay for a $30,000 loan amount $8,400 more under this so-called bipartisan deal than you would under the Reid-Warren Amendment. You will pay $14,000 more over the course of the 25-year loan if you have a $50,000 loan. So I am saying to the American people who might be watching this, the bad deal is the bipartisan deal, and the good deal is the Reid deal. Look at how much more money that individual has to pay for a $50,000 loan over 25 years, $14,000 more. Some people don't even make $14,000 in half a year. Now we're going to look at what happens to graduate students. And this is why the graduate students are speaking out against this. Look at this. If you pay back your graduate loan in 10 years, and we all know the caps are going to be reached, you pay $2,500 more for a $15,000 loan, $4,200 more for a $25,000 loan, $8,500 more under $50,000 loan, and a $100,000 loan, you'd pay $17,000 more under the so-called bipartisan deal compared to the Reid Amendment. So what you're seeing now is a breakdown of why we say it's going to be $715 million more of debt on the backs of our students. I am showing you how it breaks down per family. Let's take a look at the graduate. This is really worth looking at, Mr. President. If you're a graduate student, Mr. President, and I know you probably have a doctorate, and you had to go borrow money under this bipartisan deal, you would pay, if your amount was $30,000, $16,000 more than you would under the Reid-Warren Amendment. If you had a $50,000 loan, you'd pay $26,000. And look at this. If you have a $100,000 loan, which many people have, you hear about what the average is. Many people who go to graduate school have this. You pay $53,000 more under the so-called bipartisan deal. Now let's take a look at the parents. The parents who will have the misfortune of having to live under this. If you look at the cap, under the Reid-Warren cap, it's 7.9% cap for the parents' loans. Under the so-called bipartisan deal, it is a 10.5% cap. So what does this mean? The additional money would be $2,500 for a $15,000 loan, $4,200 for a $25,000 loan, $8,400 for a $50,000 loan, and $16,000 for a $100,000 loan. That's how much more the parents of the students would pay. And the last chart to bring it home to you is the parents who are going to live with this bipartisan deal, unless we pass Reid-Warren, they're going to have to pay over 25 years because their cap is 10.5% under this great, quote-unquote, bipartisan deal. They'll pay $16,000 more on a $30,000 loan, $26,000 more on a $50,000 loan, and hold on to your pocketbook, $53,000 more on a $100,000 loan. Why would we not support the Reid-Warren bill? Did it cost us a few bucks? Yeah. So we paid for the few bucks it cost us by putting in a millionaire surtax of 0.5%. Okay? But because the bipartisan deal expects students to pay and is putting the deficit burden on the students, their cap rages up to over 10% for the parent loans. So you might hear, oh, Senator Boxer, it'll never reach the cap. We won't get to the caps. Well, I won't go there. Simply not true. We will get to the caps. Why? I said before, the average 10-year Treasury bond over the past 30 years is 6.22%. That's what it is. The bipartisan deal plugs us into the 10-year Treasury note, Treasury bond, and adds a few dollars, a few percentage points for handling fees, and you're going to get all the way up to the cap in every case. It's just going to happen. If you don't learn from past interest rates, you can't predict the future. CBO predicts the future. They're using the past. We have to use the past. The cap will be hit. The cap will be hit. So where does it leave us? We have a stark choice to make. We can go with a bipartisan deal that people worked very hard on, and I compliment them for all the work they put into it, believe me. We can go with that deal that puts debt on the backs of our students, an additional $715 million worth of debt. Or we can go with the Reid-Warren alternative that says, students, you're already paying enough. We're not going to lay this on you. We figured out a way to do it so that you're capped at a much lower rate. This is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. The deal will take $715 million out of the students' pockets over the next 10 years. And anyone who thinks that's fair should vote for the deal. Anyone who can look into the eye of a student who's already struggling, who's already working, who's already asking their parents for help and trying to put it all together in a package, if they think it's fair, then vote for the deal. But don't kid yourself. This $715 million is going right onto the backs of our families. I've shown you the charts. This is a permanent deal. Senator Coburn, I'm pleased senators agreed on a permanent principled solution. On Friday, the Republican leader called this bill a permanent reform that ties interest rates to market rates. The Republican Help Committee, Senator Alexander, called this a long-term market-based solution. They're not going to revisit this issue. I really have to compliment Senators Reid and Warren. They deserve praise because they have come up with a plan that works, that is fair, that will give solace to our students, because for the undergraduate and graduate loans, we will see them cap out at 6.8. And for the parent loans, the cap is 7.9, compared to over 10% in the so-called bipartisan deal. Now, I promised I was going to revisit some of the stories, and I'm going to close with those stories. Sandy Barnett, 58 years old, of Illinois, took out a $21,000 loan to pay for graduate school in the late 80s. But even after earning her master's degree, Barnett struggled to find a job that paid more than $25,000 a year. She fell behind on her payments. She suffered through a layoff, a stretch of unemployment, and the death of her husband, while her student loan ballooned to $54,000. So what are we saying to Sandy Barnett? Oh, great news. We had a bipartisan breakthrough, and now we're going to add $715 million to students' debts. When Michelle Basutti, a 41-year-old family practitioner in Columbus, Ohio, finished medical school in 2003, her student loan debt amounted to $250,000. Since then, it has ballooned to $555,000. The entire balance of her federal loans, over $200,000, will be paid off in 351 months when she will be 70 years old. What are we doing here? Who are we fighting for here? How can we make one more speech on the floor of the Senate saying our students are our future? We have an immigration bill that's letting in high-tech workers because we don't have enough trained American workers to fill the jobs. Oh, we're going to make it easier on you students by piling on another $715 million of debt on your back. and on the backs of your families? Emmanuel Telez's mother is a laid-off factory worker, and $120 from her $300 unemployment check is garnished to pay the Federal Plus student loan she took out for her son. Aren't we proud? Federal government, this is great. We're garnishing Emmanuel Telez's mother, her check, her unemployment check, because she took out a Federal Plus student loan for her son. Why don't we talk about refinancing these loans? Why don't we talk about making it easier for people to pay back these loans instead of having a so-called bipartisan deal that adds $715 million to students, puts it on their backs? Deanne Lunin, a staff attorney at the National Consumer Law Center in Boston, said she's been working with an 83-year-old veteran, Mr. President, an 83-year-old veteran whose Social Security benefits have been reduced for the past 5 years. The client fell behind on a federal loan that he signed up for in the 90s to help his son with tuition costs. Lunin said the government cuts have left the client without enough cash to pay for medicine for his heart problems. Look, this is a national problem, and part of it's a national disgrace. So what's our solution? A so-called deal that makes it worse. Last year, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York reported that Americans 60 and older still owe $36 billion in student loans, and Social Security checks are being garnished, and debt collectors are harassing borrowers in their 80s over decades-old student loans. You know, we can't do this. There was a recession, the worst one since the Great Depression. Yes, people lost their jobs. Yes, people had problems. So why aren't we dealing with the underlying issues and making it easier for our families instead of having a deal that's cut? I wasn't part of it, that's for sure. That hurts our students and their families. Mr. President, Senator Merkley's here. I'm going to yield the floor, and thank you very much for your patience.